Okay. Are you able to see my desktop okay, Jeff? Not there. Who's,
I am seeing it. Yes, sir.
you are there. So, okay. it's it's always fun to talk to someone who does not exist.
Yeah, I'm here. I just couldn't get to it quick enough. Yes, I can see your desktop.
Yeah. All right. Very good. So this is our Bible study, and we're going to be going into the Bible study for October the 9th, 2022. And we're going to be going from Genesis 1 into Genesis 2 to really go into this evaluation of relationships, especially family relationships, husband-wife relationships, and that sort of thing. So, so with that, I'm going to go over here and need to move that up, give myself a little more room. And now, just to let you know, what I've got before you at the present is what I call a descriptive literal translation of Genesis 2. And we're going to look at a little more when we get down into the matter of the nature of the woman. When we say woman, we say woman, but it's the word man with the W-O on the front of it in that sense. And we're going to look at the nature of woman as a repetition, the word pam in Hebrew, of the man. So just to scan through this, and we've been talking about how God created, and when he created, you think about it, as we asked those questions last week, why in the world, if all we needed to know was that Jesus died for our sins, and when we believe in him or believe on him, as some people say, then we're saved, and that's all there is to it. If that is all there is to say, or that was all that was needed, then God could have done that, as I said last week, in 3 verses. He could have done it in less, but that's not the issue now. The issue is that we have all of this information that's in this book that we call the Bible. And why did God give all of that? What is the purpose of it? Well, one of the things that we saw when we were going through Genesis 1 is God did everything. And of course, keep in mind, he did it all perfectly. Everything was brought into existence according to his person, the person of God existing before the first point of creation was ever done. So everything's going to be done perfectly according to his design. Humans were made, they were constructed, they were formed, they were created in his image and likeness. And we talked about the nature of that image and likeness. It's not a physical thing. It's not something where there's a difference in the image in males and females. Both are created in that image and likeness equally. So it's not a matter that the man looks like God and the woman does not. That is just absurdity relative to what the scriptures actually say, especially in Genesis 1:27. But he gives all of these details about what he did, so much that he did. And here, just in the first 3 verses of chapter 2, he says, and I'm going to read my descriptive literal translation. And we've talked about the meaning of these words, dimensionality and basic matter. And we could say heaven and earth. And those are just words to represent what he said in his Hebrew text, or what was then the language of Adam. So then the dimensionality and the basic matter and the entirety of the host of them existed completed. So everything is completed at that stage. Then Elohim completed in the 7th day his work which he made. Then he ceased in the seventh day from the entirety of his work, which you may notice. I did not use the word, then God rested in the seventh day, because the word that is translated rested does not mean to rest as we think. It just means to cease, to stop doing something, whatever it is. And so it may, in our case, it may involve taking a nap, rest, but God did not need rest. So that is not at all the case here. So then verse 3, then Elohim blessed the seventh day, then he sanctified it, because in it he ceased from the entirety of his work, which God created to make. Tells us the purpose. He created all these things to make them, to form them, and to have something that he desired to have. So then verse 4, we go into, excuse me, these exist the origins, and you notice, and this is similar to what Rebecca was looking at, that this is the record of the origins of Adam. That's what she was talking about just a little bit ago. And so this is the word origins is the same word here as it is there. So these exist the origins of, and he says the dimensionality and the basic matter. So dimensionality, space, or shall we say a location, a place for everything to exist from our human perspective, and basic matter. So of these two things, dimensionality and basic matter, everything is going to be built. It's all going to partake of dimensionality, and it's all going to partake of basic matter in whatever kind. So then so these are the origins in the being created, and I was changing that. I thought I took a word out. Let me put here, in the being created of them. And so when they were created, we might say, but it's that idea of being created. It's a passive verb, and it's saying that this is something that happened to them. This is not something they did. There was some agent acting on them, bringing them into existence, and that's what happened. So, and then a kind of a restatement of that. In the making of Yihya Elohim, earth and space. And by the way, just to let you know, this verse, chapter 2, verse 4, is the very first occurrence of the name of God in the scriptures, the word Yihya, or what we'd say Yahweh or Jehovah or that sort of thing. But Yihya, that's his name, literally meaning, as we've talked about many times before, he exists. And then we go on through, and then I looked at the structure of this in Hebrew, and I changed what I originally had here, supplying verbs and things like that, as can be done. But it says, these exist the origins, and then I submit to you, these are also the origins of in a sense, of the entirety of the plan of the field before it was existing in the earth, and the origins of the entirety of the herb field before it was growing, understood in the earth. And then you could say that the entirety of the plan of the field existed before it was existing in the earth, in a sense. That is, it was in the earth had the ability to produce it because God had already built it into the earth to produce it. But he had not caused these things to grow yet, because Yihya Elohim caused not raining. So he had not caused raining upon the earth. And an Adam, that's a human, existed non-existent. Sounds a little bit unusual to say it that way, but that's basically the way that the Hebrew would phrase it. So an Adam, a human, was non-existent, we would say, to serve the ground. And a mist was going up from the earth, and it was watering the entirety of the faces of the ground. And we're not going to go into those things, the scientific side of it at this point, but Then Yahweh Elohim formed the Adam from the dust of the ground, and he formed him dust from the ground. And then, and you notice these thens, these are what are called wow consecutives on imperfect verbs, which changes them into a perfect, completed action. So then Yahweh Elohim formed the Adam, dust from the ground. Then he breathed in his nostrils breath of life. Then the Adam existed for living, for a soul of living. Then Yahweh Elohim planted a garden in Eden from east. Then he placed there the Adam, which he had formed, or which he had formed, either way. But then Yahweh Elohim caused growing from the ground the entirety of trees, existing pleasant to sight and good to food, and the tree of life existing in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So we have these two, and there's no explanation of where the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is said to be, but because it follows right after the tree of life existing in the midst of the garden and the tree of knowledge of good and evil, apparently this tree of knowledge of good and evil also existed in the midst of the garden, very near the tree of life. So then we have Adam's description of the river that was going out from Eden. And he says, and a river exists going out from Eden to cause watering the garden. And from there, it is existing, separating, and it is existing to four heads. And then he tells about the name of each one. The name of the one exists, I'll just say that way for now, exists Pishon, which is, sometimes it's difficult to say what these words actually mean, but it seems like it would have the idea like a charging, or some say frisking. But you think about it, it's like one, probably a river that was kind of flowing and going over rocks and this and that and the other, and thus kind of very lively water, let's say that. And he says it's the one surrounding the entirety of the land of Havilah. And what about Havilah? Where there exists the gold. Interesting that he says the gold. And the gold of that land exists good. There exists Delium and the Dolak and the stone of the onyx. The Shaham is there. So we get a little description of this Pishon River, the first river, and where it is. It goes around the land of Havilah. And the name of the second river existed, Gihon, and that's often associated with this idea of bursting forth, like it's just flowing out. And it's an interesting thing to think of this right now, especially these names, because well, let me do the others here. But because you've got the Pishon, and it seems to have some idea of charging or frisking, very, very active water as it's flowing down. And the second is Gihon, bursting forth. And he says it exists, the one surrounding the entirety of the land of Cush. And the name of the third river exists, Hideko. And that is, it exists, the one going to the east of Asher. And that is the one that we use that name for the Tigris. And basically it seems to have some idea of rapidity associated with the movement of that water. And then he says the fourth river, and it exists Perath. And Perath is what we now, it's the name we use, Euphrates. And so it seems to have that idea of a great river, something like that. But if you think about it, these things were, these are in the earliest days of the creation that these rivers are existing, and they have, shall we say, sufficient water to be charging and frisking and bursting forth and rapid and great and all of that. It's not like the way things are now. As my wife and I were driving yesterday a little bit, and we passed over a stream in an area of the county, and as we drove over the bridge, you look down and see, and it was interesting. We looked at the water, and you could see there was water in the stream, And my wife said, "Oh, and it's flowing." The water was actually flowing. The reason she said that is because so often, especially in late summer, or sometimes earlier in summer, but especially in late summer and fall, many of the streams tend to have greatly reduced water flows, and therefore they look more like a little pool here and a little pool there, with just a trickle flowing down to the next pool. But it's kind of interesting. These rivers seem to have been rivers that were very, very active in their flows. We'll just say it that way. And then we have this statement about what God did with the Adam. And keep in mind, at this point in time, woman has not been made. The only human is the male Adam that he has created. So then God took the Adam, and the verse actually says that he caused the resting of him. The verb is a very distinctive verb. It's from the same verb root as the name Noah. And the name Noah means basically to rest. So his dad named him that way, thinking of him as he's going to give some measure of rest in some way, because of all the terrible things that were going on in the earth in that day. Things so terrible that they were going to require God to actually wipe the face of the earth, except for 8 people and those animals which were in the ark. So God caused the resting of him in the Garden of Eden to serve it and to keep it. And the point that I'd like to make here, notice that in the design of God, before there was any violation on the part of a human, before anyone had ever rejected the design of God and sought his or her own way, that the work that man had to do, the serving and keeping of the Garden of Eden, before there was ever any problem between man and God that would alienate man from God, even the work that God had for him to do was really rest. It was not a toil. It was not a labor that was something that was undesirable from the part of the human. There would have been the work that Adam would have to do at that time compared to the resting or his free time, so to speak, when he would not be working. There would be no difference. The work and the free time and the pleasures would all have been one thing, because God caused him to rest in the Garden of Eden, to serve it and to keep it. That was the design of God. Difficult for us to conceive from this side of history, but nonetheless, that is exactly what God said. So then God instructed upon the Adam to the saying of, and this is where that instruction comes. From the entirety of the tree or trees, that's a collective term, the tree of the garden, eating you will eat. And so he's told, you're going to eat, and then you can eat, basically saying that you are free to eat, giving the choice to Adam to determine what tree of the garden he would eat from. He could eat from this one, then go to that one, and go to that one, and go to that, and he is free to choose. And keep in mind, that also brings up another point. God doesn't say, you will eat this tree now you're going to go over and eat that tree. Now you're going to go over and eat that tree. There was a freedom that God was giving to the man, as long as the man stayed within the bounds of the design of the one who had created him. So there was a free will, but the free will existed within the bounds which had been established, or which were established by the design of the Creator for his existence. There was no free will to exceed the bounds that God had established. And this becomes a very important point, because so often in our relationships, in the world, we tend to think that there are certain things that, shall we say, are sufficient to motivate us to violate the design of God in our relationships. And that's clearly not the case. Everything that we do as human beings is bounded by the design of God, and we can either walk within those criteria of that design, or we can usurp to ourselves an authority, as Adam would do, and we see that coming in chapter 3. And we can usurp to ourselves an authority to violate, to step beyond the bounds, but we've never been authorized to do that. So if we step beyond the bounds, we are stepping outside the design of God. We are violating the design of God. And regardless of the thing that seems to motivate us to do that, we never have authority from God to commit such violation. We must always be seeking to do everything that he would have done according to the criteria of his design. And I know it sounds like a very legalistic kind of life in the eyes of some people, but I can tell you it is not legalistic. It's actually quite free, because you know you're not bound by any of the ideas of humans. The only binding on life is the God and his design, which is perfect. Do you have something, Jeff?
Yes, I was just thinking, if there's no explicit command to not leave the garden, just wondering about the size of that garden, being so enormous that there would be no desire to leave it. Just curious.
Yeah, I tend to think, and I don't know how big it would have to be, but let's say it this way. I'm persuaded that we have this residual sense within us that was perfectly built into Adam. And that sense is something that, well, as you know, as Mom and I go riding somewhere, and we love to go to the mountains. We love to go up on the Blue Ridge Parkway or something like that. And to just get up there, and you come to some of those overlooks, and especially the highest one, which is about 6,000 feet elevation, and you park there and you look out over the just mountain after mountain after mountain after mountain, and you watch that, and you see the clouds and the shadows of the clouds as they move across the mountains and everything, and they're just something that's beautiful. And I guess I'd have to say, what would you say, hon? Restful. Mm-hmm. It's just restful. It's peaceful, just looking out over all of that. And the funny thing is, we don't own any of it. It's not about ownership, but we look out and we see it, and we think of what God has built there and has allowed us to be a part of. And so, Jeff, I tend to think the garden wasn't one of these little patch gardens like we have. It was probably I don't know, it could have been equivalent to a whole land area of a country nowadays. And you say, well, he could never get the work done. The work wasn't work. He was there to serve it and to keep it. And so it wasn't something that was necessarily small, but even as it would grow and so forth, that there's another point. This garden, before it was ever affected by Adam's violation, was growing exactly according to the design of the Creator. Everything was going exactly according to the design of the Creator. And so Adam's work is according to the design of the Creator. everything is working in total, complete harmony. And so people, to say, well, he wouldn't be able to take care of more than about 50 acres or 500 acres or something. I don't believe that. I don't believe it at all. I believe that Adam and Eve could have lived in a garden that was hundreds and hundreds of square miles, if you will. And it would still have been the same garden, and he would still have the same things that he does in the garden and so forth. And it would never get out of hand because it is growing according to the perfect design of the Creator.
No weed.
No weeds.
No weeds? Well, I tend to think there were weeds. The problem was they weren't weeds in those days.
And no rocks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But thinking too, just thinking about weeds. One of the things we've been noticing this year, especially like as we drove up 127 going up towards Taylorsville, and along the road, for some reason this year, there are just thousands of these little yellow flowers on the sides of the roads in clumps here and there, and some sections maybe 100 feet long, like they were just planted by the millions of seeds in one of the ditches or something along the road. And they are just beautiful little yellow flowers. They're not these, some of them aren't so great, but these are this bright yellow it's just sharp. And as we drove along and you look at that, and I know we both had the thought, those are wildflowers. Wow, they would be beautiful in anybody's garden. So I guess even now in our lives, sometimes the things that we would regard as wildflowers or weeds in one person's garden or one person's perspective would just be a beautiful flower in another person's perspective. And so,
True.
and I think too, we have, I have a couple of pictures somewhere in our files of a million pictures. And one of the pictures is of a thistle, with those kind of purpley violet flowers that grow on them. And I got a picture of a thistle, and there's a bumblebee on it on one side of the flower, and there's a honeybee on the other side of the flower. And I mean, and it just, the flower is just so perfect and so beautiful. Now, granted, I don't want to touch the plant because I've done it before and they put little stickers in you. But the flower itself is beautiful. And I guess in a certain setting where everyone's protected from the nettles, it'd be a beautiful flower in a garden. The only problem is it also spreads like wildflowers, and then it also I don't know, it may exceed the bounds of your garden if you do it this year. But in the day of Adam, I don't see that kind of thing happening, simply because it was all within the design of God. But that's a good thought. You think about how large would it have been? Difficult to say. So, you had something, Stephen?
Yeah, in regard to the size of the garden, based on God's design, there's nothing that would restrict, the garden from growing. If Adam is taking dominion, tilling the garden, and so forth, over time, it could also be expected to grow.
Sure. Well,
but obviously, because of things got cut short based on, his decision, and things changed.
Yeah. Well, I kind of wonder, because of the, shall we say, the quality of the earth before the violation, I kind of wonder if there was a boundary to the garden. As a matter of fact, I'm not sure that there would have been a boundary to the garden, as far as edges, so to speak. But but there was a boundary that was established when Adam violated and when God expelled him from the garden.
Definitely.
So, and so, but before that, I mean, what would have happened? Let's say if Adam and Eve were living in the garden, and then they got to the quote unquote edge of it, would they just stop at the edge? There was no reason. There was no proscription from going beyond the edge of the garden and coming back into it. But at the same time, would they even be perceiving that they were leaving the garden? So I'm not sure that the garden was, as shall we say, a planted area that had distinct boundaries the way we think of them now. And I would not even be surprised. And I have no scripture to support this directly, but I would not be surprised if Adam and Eve had walked beyond the bounds of the shall we say, the original bounds of the garden, if there had been such a thing, that when they walked beyond the bounds of it, wherever they walked would have become the new bounds of the garden.
That's kind of the idea. Yeah.
Yeah. And the reason I say that, and I can't make a total connection, but remember when God told Abraham to walk around upon the land, and he said, every place where your foot goes and the places where you see these lands, I have given to your descendants. And so if Abraham had walked in a little 10-foot diameter circle, that would have been it. But he didn't. He could walk, and as we've talked about at different times, I don't imagine the man staying in the lowlands and looking up at territory. He would go up on top of a mountain. He could walk up on top of a hillside or something and look out, much like we would look out from the parkway, and we'd look out and we'd say, oh, wow. But when he did that, because it was the design of God, that would mean everything that his eyes were cast upon would become the property of his descendants in the future. And so was the boundary established before he looked out? And I'd say no. But as he looked out, as he saw something, as he moved from place to place and saw new areas and things like that, the boundaries expanded and expanded and expanded. So I don't know. So what do you think, Jeff? Did the garden expand as Adam and Eve walked around? Or was it just right there under their feet all the time?
Well, the only indication I thought of was that later when the cherubim had a flaming sword, he drove out the man and placed at the east of the Garden of Eden. So, just curious about the size of that garden.
Yeah.
And it would not have been work, of course, to, like you say, it's a great thought. You think of the growing seasons that we have that wouldn't have been seasons. So perpetual growth. So what work in our minds, what work would there have been?
Well, see, it just, it wouldn't fit our definition.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think about that. The only time I've ever seen anything really like that, while I was in Vietnam, I didn't perceive it. It was there, but I didn't perceive it. But years ago, when Mom and I went to Hawaii, and here you are in Hawaii, and the place stays green all year round. And the flowers bloom all year round. There's always something blooming and everything. It's like a constant garden state, if you will. And yet, like we were saying, when they were expelled from the garden, that could be, and I would think about this, that'd be the moment when God set a boundary to them, because he was going to maintain his garden. It would still be there. It would still be a testimony of what they had rejected. But so he maintains that garden, that area. And it may have been regarded as a localized garden after they were expelled, but not a localized garden before they violated. I don't know if that makes any sense or not, but it was a garden, but it does not seem to have bounds before they violated. But after violation, it was certainly bounded. And we think there were two angels on the way to that garden. So there were two cherubim, or were they seraphim? I forgot what they were, but they were so there's two angels, cherubim, and they were guarding the way to the tree of life. We get the picture that there was this path, and there was this one path going into the garden to the tree of life, and the angels were there to keep you. Well, what would have stopped Adam and Eve from walking around the cherubim and going over to the other side of the garden to go into the tree of life if they wanted? Did God build a wall? No, I don't think it was any wall of any kind, but there was a boundary that was kept by God and by his angelic servants. So difficult to comprehend, but I guess we can form in our minds a picture of what was happening from what we can see in Scripture. And anyway, anything else? Okay, let's look on a little bit farther then. So in 16, then Yahweh God instructed upon the Adam, he puts this upon him, typical way of saying these things in Hebrew, to lay something on someone, to the saying of, this was the saying, from the entirety of the tree of the garden, eating you will eat. So he has this freedom to eat. And from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And you will not eat from it. And then he gives a reason, gives him the foundation, because in the day of your eating from it, literally dying, you will die. Now, we'll talk about the actual dying and what happened when we get over into 3. And excuse me a minute, I think I'm going to sneeze. Must be pollen from those trees in the garden. So the bad part is, isn't it funny?
They wouldn't have.
There wouldn't have been any sneezes from the pollen of the trees in the garden. Not until Adam violated and was cast out. So, now we get to that interesting place. So then Yahweh God said, not good exist, the existing of the Adam to the aloneness of him. So he's saying it is not good for the Adam to exist alone. And he says, I will make to him, or for him, a helper as prominent to him. Now, what's interesting is what God does next in the account, because God has looked on the situation, and he's looked on the situation before Adam names the animals. And he says that he does, that it is, shall we say, when he says not good, not the idea that something evil or bad existed, a bad condition did not exist. It was just that it was the next step in God's creative activity had not yet been taken, just as day 6 had not occurred when day 1 was complete, and so forth. So the next step in God's creative activity was not yet done, but in the perspective of God, that absolute perfect goodness did not exist, and it would not exist until he would make to him a helper and we would say as prominent to him, someone who would be able to stand right up to him and be his, corresponding to him. And so that's where we get that idea, the Azer, and we could look at that word, but the point I want to get to is a little bit farther beyond. So she was an Azer, that's a helper, and we say kenegdo, and a calf preposition on the front, and it's so as prominent to him. So this is going to be a helper that's going to be made specifically for the Adam. And now, why would he need help? What help would Adam need in the garden? I mean, he is already resting in the Garden of Eden. And God has given him the instructions regarding eating and not eating. Why would he need a helper? What was God's design for them? Do you remember at the end of chapter 1 when God gave them his commission? God blessed them and he said unto them, and I think I can remember them in English, and he said, be fruitful, that is, be productive. And now I can't remember the English, but anyway, I can remember that it means to become many. So they were to become many. Let's see, be fruitful and multiply, yes, and replenish the earth and subdue it and have dominion over all of these things that are on the earth. Wow. I can remember Peru, Uruvu, Mil'u, Eth Haaretz, Wukivshua, Uruvu, and all of that. So, terrible when you can remember Hebrew better than you can remember English, especially when you're an Anglican. But so when he says this, he had given them that instruction, and in the perfect design of God, they were to become many. They were to be productive. That is, that his design is for them to reproduce and to become many in their reproducing and to literally fill the earth. And they are to kivshua, I like to say basically manage it, do the work that he would have them to do in the earth according to his design, and then they were to have this dominion over everything. So they are going to be basically his representatives to everything else upon earth. And they are the only created beings that have this image and likeness of God with respect to everything else on the earth. Even angels don't have what he put into humans in that respect. So, you think about that. So be fruitful and multiply. So the question comes up, how long do you think it would have been with Adam and Eve in the garden, they're in the garden, before they began to take actions to have children? How long would it be? A month? A year? 10 years? I submit to you, if they had waited a month and said, oh, well, we're not ready to have children yet. We're going to wait for this, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do that. And then they said, well, and, or maybe next year we'll have, or this or that. They would have been in violation of his design if they were withholding themselves from the act of procreation. And thus, I submit to you that they would have been engaging in the act of procreation very, very soon, maybe even the same day after they were created, maybe even hours, we don't know. But the issue is there's no indication that the first man and woman violated God's design by taking to themselves and making up their own understanding of what would be, let's say, what would constitute being productive, becoming many, and filling up the earth. If they had said, well, my understanding of this is that, if they were Baptists of the present day, they'd say, well, this is what I believe God would have us to do. This is what I think God said. Well, they didn't do that. They heard what God actually said, and thus they are going to go about doing what God had for them to do. And by the way, the very same kind of thing would have been a part of the action post-flood for Shem, Ham, and Japheth and their wives. If they had chosen to say, well, we're not having children now, we got enough, well, we got all these troubles, oh, we got to start growing food, we got to do this, we got to do that, then they would have been deciding when they should begin filling the earth. And that was what they had been told to do as well. So the point being, those people, and let's think about Adam and Eve, and how many children might they have had through the years. With the blessing of God upon their actions, even before before there's any violation has occurred, and I don't believe that it was very long that they lived in the garden before the violation occurred. And I would not be surprised if it was even less than a month or something like that, maybe days. But the issue being this, that they would have been seeking to begin procreation, to have children and such like that, essentially immediately. If they did not, they would have been in violation of the design of God before Adam ever ate of the apple. And I said apple, I don't know what it was. I like apples. So, of course, I like peaches and everything else. But you think about this. And so Eve was already expecting, whether she could perceive it or not in her body, I don't know, but she was already expecting before the violation ever occurred and before they were ever expelled from the garden. So, you can say, well, I just don't believe that. Well, I believe God, and I believe God told them what to do. And I also believe that they did not violate the design of God before they ate of the forbidden tree. And thus, that means they were actively doing all the things that God had designed them to do in their lives. And the primary thing was to be productive, to reproduce, we'll say, and to become many, and to fill the earth, and to manage it. Like apparently, Adam serving and keeping the Garden of Eden was not so much work that he had to do, because it wasn't violating the design of the Creator. It was a management aspect, and perhaps helping him to learn how to properly manage, so he could pass these things on to his children. So it doesn't make sense to me that they just waited until sometime in future, long after they had been expelled from the garden, and it had been years since they had been created. So God's very concept, here we are, this would be on that last day, that sixth day, when God brings the animals to Adam, and he's going to name all of them. So we go to verse 19, and God has already said there needs to be a helper for Adam to be able to fulfill all that I have designed him to do. He never designed the male to do all of these things that he was designed to do. He couldn't do it by himself. He needed a helper to fulfill the criteria of God's design for his life. And thus, then, verse 19, Yahweh God had formed from the ground the entirety of the living thing of the field and the entirety of the flying thing of the space. So he's got all these animals, all these creatures that are in the fields and everything, just living out there and going about doing all the things they do, and the birds and the things that fly in the space, the dimensionality of the atmosphere. And then he caused the coming of them to see what he will call to it. So he caused these things to come to the Adam, and the entirety which the Adam will call to it, and that that is these things that are souls of living, just like Adam became a living soul, a nefesh chaya. These things that are coming to him are also nefesh chaya, so they are souls of living, exactly like Adam is a soul of living. What's interesting is, well, let me ask you, if Adam is called a soul of living and the exact same term is applied to these creatures that he's going to be naming, what would that imply to you? And I'm going to leave, I was going to add more words, but I'm going to leave it there. So what would that imply to you if God called Adam a soul of living and uses the exact identical term for all of these animals that Adam is going to name? For instance, does it mean that Adam is just another animal, or does it mean that animals are on the same level as humans? Are they really different? Maybe we should call our dogs and our cats and things furry babies of humans. Maybe we should refer to them as our children. Maybe we will meet them on the Rainbow Bridge. Thoughts?
But nowhere did God ever say that the animals were made in his image. There was a distinction made. They may have things in common, but there is definitely a distinction there.
Okay. So what would they have in common, Stephen?
And then they both had the breath of life, for starters. They're
Yeah.
alive.
Yeah. And that's
That eternal part is not there.
not like the
Not
Adam.
like man.
So they are made distinct from humans. They were actually made before the human. Then the human brought into existence, and he is made distinctively different with that image and likeness. More. Are there any similarities between humans and what we'll call these animals of the field?
They both like to eat.
Partake of the plants.
You know what? That's true. I might have to go get me a bowl of vegetable soup here in a little bit too. So
Or a moo bar.
I think they're gone. I think Jeff ate them all. Oh my. No, there might be one in there, Jeff. So.
Animals have emotions.
Oh, my wife says animals have emotions. Do they?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Think.
Where do animals get their emotions?
Creator.
Yes. Built into them by God. What else do they have? Do they have bodies?
Yes.
And shall we say, do they have life within their bodies? Let's see, humans have, we like to call humans, when we talk about a person, we like to say they have intellect, that is, they have the ability to think and to form thoughts and to reach conclusions and all of that. Do animals have intellect? Is Heather there nearby, Jeff?
You did say, oh yeah.
So
Yes.
ask her if she remembers Mauser.
She remembers Mauser. She can't
Was-
talk her.
Tell him I think so.
She thinks
That's
so.
okay. She doesn't have to talk. I know what she's thinking. But this was a cat, and we see dogs, other things, other creatures. They have intellect. They can learn, and they develop abilities. But their abilities to learn are not the same as those of humans. They don't ever measure up to what humans, just a simple human, does. Do they have, and they have emotions. We said that. Do they have a will? That is, whether or not they want to do something or they don't want to do something. Do they have a will?
Most definitely.
Yes, definitely do. So there are aspects of animals, or shall we say, there are aspects of existence that humans and animals share. But like you said at the beginning, Stephen, the animals are not built in the image and likeness of the Creator. And what that says, and especially when we look at that man was given dominion over the creatures, then that says if man is given dominion and he has that image and likeness of the Creator, and I think we've talked about this previously, that image and likeness and that dominion, that makes them essentially representatives of the Creator to the rest of the creation. And that also carries another step with it. If we are representatives of the Creator, just like a representative nowadays, which we might call him an ambassador, we might send an ambassador to another country to represent our country. But let's see, got it. So we could send an ambassador to another country to represent our country, but the thing of it is, he must act within the will of our country to be a proper representative. We have been given the image and likeness of God and the dominion over the creation. But what that says is we are representatives of the Creator, the one who brought the creation into existence. And that means we are to represent ourselves to the creation just as God would represent himself to that creation. We do not have authority to exceed the criteria of God's design in the least point. When we step outside the criteria of God's design, we do not have that same dominion. We do not have that same authority. And we are no longer representing him within his design. We might claim to represent him, but then it's another point of violation and we're lying. So we've got to be, when we think about this, yes, there's a lot of similarity here, but there's got to be a difference. Now, one of the things that we deal with here is this idea, and it keeps coming up, especially nowadays with the focus on pets, pet animals of all kinds. And it's amazing how many people, well, let's not say people, let's say how many believers, people who claim to have been born again by the blood of Christ, by faith in Christ, and they claim to be walking in the Spirit, but when it comes to relationships with the creatures, especially those creatures that belong to them, something goes haywire. They lose it. They start thinking of these creatures, and the creatures take on an importance and a power over them that even makes those creatures more important than other human beings. And when it comes down to whether or not you're going to save the creature or save the human, a lot of people would just plain say, if it's my dog, my cat, save my cat and leave the humans. And if you think that's not happening right now, you need to watch a little bit of the news and look at how many times you see on the news how much is happening where you have news articles about there having been a fire in a home or something like that, or there was at the flood, just like with this hurricane, and it was a wonderful, wonderful act by the first responders, the firemen and such like that, and they actually went into this area and hazarded their lives to save the life of this animal, this pet that was there. And I don't have a problem with them doing that, but you need to pay attention to the fact that they're not going to just stop by saying, oh yeah, this guy, that was really great because he saved the life of this animal. But there's another issue to that. How much did it cost? How much did they take out of the pocket of the other people living around there through their taxes and such? How much did they take in order to save the life of that animal? And I'm gonna make it pointed that way. And I know we look at something and we say, wow, oh, I can't imagine. Oh, I love my dog or I love my cat. Folks, let me tell you, when we get into Genesis chapter 4, and we start looking at what happened with Cain and why Cain did not bring the right sacrifice and what God said to him, it is obvious in that if you read the text of the scripture the way God wrote it, there was a sacrifice lying right at the door of Cain's dwelling, whatever his dwelling was. There was a sacrifice, a proper sacrifice lying at the door, and it's lying in repose. It was not crouching. It was not ready to pounce upon him, and it was not sin. It was a sin offering that was there. And he could have taken it, but he chose to, shall we say, save the life of his animal over walking with God. He would rather violate the design of God instead of giving that animal according to the design of God. And nowadays, this especially in what we call our Western countries, you can see it developing. I mean, there are people who have animals that, and we hear this thing, oh, well, he wouldn't bite a flea. This dog wouldn't do that. They wouldn't hurt anybody. And then the dog kills someone or mauls a child or another person. And the person who owns it can't even imagine why it happened. It couldn't be the animal's fault. It must have been the person, so we can't blame the animal. This, and especially in our Western culture, we are losing all wisdom with respect to our relationship to animals. And I tell you, I like petting friendly dogs and cats and things like that. And I've always been someone from a boy having pets around the home and things like that. But there's a standard to which we must go, and then we stop, because the standard is the limit of the design of God. And we do not go beyond that limit, because when we do, we are in violation, period. So it's not something nice to say nowadays. People don't like it, but that's where we are. And it's because our culture and our society is moving farther and farther away from God and his design, faster and faster and faster, it seems. It's kind of amazing. So
Now they have them crossing a rainbow bridge.
yeah, well, so I guess, Heather, when we die, we'll meet Mouser at the Rainbow Bridge or something like that. So, by the way, that was stated to me very distinctly by a man who was a year after his pet dog had gotten old and died. He was still mourning his dog, and he claimed to be a believer and representative of God and loving God and Jesus Christ and everything. And he told me that he was looking forward to meeting his pet dog on the Rainbow Bridge. And you need to think, where in the world do they get this stuff? They make it up. They make it up. Just because animals are souls of living, each one is a nefesh chaya, a soul of living. They have a nefesh. They do have a soul. And that is basically their life. They have a nefesh, a soul that is living, just like humans have a soul that is living. But they were never made in the image and likeness of God, and they are not the same as humans. And when we treat them the same as we would treat humans, then we are in violation of the design of God. It doesn't mean you don't feed your dog or your cat or something like that. It doesn't mean you don't take care of them. But nowadays, it's gone far beyond. And I mean, nowadays we have people spending incredible amounts of money on animals, and the veterinary services love it. So, but is it the design of God? Well, anyway, enough. We're at time now. We have to, let's see. So we need to, we'll finish up this Adam giving names to the beast, if you will, and the flying things and all of the other living things of the field. And then the creation of this Pa'am. And go down. And the word Pa'am is translated right here in 23. And he said, this one understood exist. Hapa'am, the repetition. Well, what was she a repetition of? She was a repetition of the man. And he recognized that. She was bone from his bones and flesh from his flesh. And he says, to this one, it will be called Isha, woman, because from man, this one was taken. So she will be called Isha. And that's what I've got over here to the side. She will be called Isha because from Ish, she was taken. So anyway, anything else before we go today? Any thoughts, questions, remarks, comments?
Maybe for next time, some thought like those who would use like the donkey that spoke to Balaam respond. You know, I've thought of these things where the serpent and the donkey and the animals communicating with humans, and those who would take the personalization of animals, and they would use those, I'm sure, those accounts. So maybe for next time, some thought could be constructed for those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and you know, when I say these things, the typical owner of a pet whose life is bound up in the pet thinks that what I'm saying is, well, you can just treat animals any way you want. No, you can't. You treat them like created beings. You know, God brought them into existence. They are his creatures, and we are representatives of him to these animals. There is a right way to interact with these animals, and there's a wrong way. And the wrong way is violation of his design. But we have this idea that, well, you know, people say, oh, well, you don't want me to take care of my pet. No, that's not what I'm saying. Don't be stupid. You know, that's what I'm thinking of these people. But it's like I said to a lady the other night. She said, you said you would do this. And I said, no. I said, don't you put words in my mouth. I did not say that. I said I would talk to the board about that. And she said, you said this. No, I did not. And people like to put words in your mouth. And there'll be people who would take what we've talked about today and what we talk about next week, Jeff, with those things. And they're going to say, oh, this is what you said. And I'll say, no, it's not. You see, that's another one of the things. The very idea that the person who is receiving the communication, whether hearing it, reading it, or whatever, thinks that he or she has the authority to determine the meaning and significance of that communication is absolute absurdity. The meaning and the significance are invested in the communication by the author of the communication. This is a standard problem we have right now. We have the scriptures, and every human out here says, well, I think it means this. Well, I think it means this. I think it means this. Well, it doesn't matter what you think it means. It matters what God intended us to perceive that it means. And for people to say, well, you know, it means this to you, means that to me, and they think it's all good. No, that's garbage. That's violation right there. And I don't care if a guy's a Baptist or what he thinks he is. If he has that attitude, he is a false teacher in that respect. And we got a lot of them running around. So anyway. Anything else? Anybody? Hey, John.
Yes.
What are you doing?
Listening.
Oh.
Yeah, I was thinking of Germany with their love of animals over people.
Thinking of what? Can't hear you very well.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Ah, yes. There we go.
I was thinking of Nazi Germany
Oh,
with the love of animals and how they actually used that as a reason to begin killing the Jews because
yeah.
they sacrificed their lambs.
Oh, yeah. Well, and you think about it, so many of the heathen cultures through the years, you know, they wanted to offer a blood sacrifice, but they would not offer an animal. They would find a human and offer a human. And at first they started offering humans that they didn't like, apparently. or enemies and things like that. They'd offer the life of an enemy as a blood sacrifice. But then eventually they started offering not just an enemy male, they would offer a princely, so to speak, male of their own culture. And then they moved into offering some of these, some young woman who is a beautiful, desirable young woman, and they offer her. And they're still offering blood sacrifices, and they're claiming that this is what God would have them to do, but they have so misrepresented the design of the Creator in the matter. And I can tell you, I don't doubt Cain's descendants probably did the same kind of thing. They probably started offering blood sacrifices, but they weren't the blood sacrifices of God.
Well, yes. Mhm. Yeah, we need have week-long classes in churches on just how to think through the situations of life.
Yeah. By the way, we and oh yes, and Pete, yes, I can, and I'll have to do that. So I'll make a note of it, and then we can get together. But one of the things I was thinking of, and I wanted to tell you too, Rebecca and I have been. We had a meeting on the internet with a pastor down in Georgia, and he wants us to come down and do a Friday night, Saturday morning, Saturday night, Sunday morning series of lessons and things, especially regarding seeing God as He is, and then how. And Rebecca would she'll do lessons with ladies and things, and I'll do men, and then we'll do some that will be together, but trying to help these people see God and His design for our relationships. And so we don't know exactly when it'll be. It looks like it'll be sometime in the spring. So got it, John. I got to figure out, John, how I'm going to work this out. So it will coincide with First Bible.
Uh-huh. Oh, and I was thinking, I don't know, I'll just put this out. If you have time to come to one of my classes, it's historical and cultural background to the Bible.
Mm.
And
Ooh.
do a session on Psalm 132.
Mm-hmm.
And I've introduced and been building on the idea that the fact that God's word and His person are inseparable.
Oh yeah.
Holding off on going to the actual text there, and but so I just put that invitation out. Sometime you could come in, and that would be that class meets at 8 o'clock on Monday and Wednesday.
That's when my class meets.
Yeah, I didn't think about that.
You
That's
could watch the reruns.
That's Brother Foster's fault. We'll blame it on him.
Okay.
Nothing like blaming the dean of the college.
Well, what we could do is just if you would be up to that, just meet at a different time. So just meet around your schedule, and I wouldn't meet at 8, and then just I would work it out with the class to meet some other time.
Yeah, we could do that. Sure.
All
Okay.
right.
Okay.
About
All right.
anything.
All right. Very good. Anything else? So let's see. All right. Very good. I'm going to stop our recording then, and we will go to